It is time to talk about society's biggest cockroaches.
Oh, you mean feminazis, communists? How about social justice warriors?
Cop blockers and sovereign citizens.
Okay, that wouldn't have been my first guess, but I'll roll with it.
Am I being detained, officer? Yes, dumbass, you are. There's a ton of videos of these weirdos online.
So this is poisoning the well. He's trying to portray the opposition as a bunch of random weirdos online, before actually going into detail on what their viewpoints are specifically.
Now, if you don't like cops because you just had a few, bad run-ins or whatever, I'm not talking about you. I can still leave, a good lasting impression on you. I'm talking about the people that just solely hate cops just for no fucking reason whatsoever.
Yeah, if somebody hates police, it must be for one of those two reasons. Either they had a bad experience with a cop, or for just simply no reason at all. There are simply no other possible reasons anyone could be critical of the police.
I'm talking about grown-ass men that have nothing else better to do with their day other than stand on the corner with a camera.
Oh, you mean like the grown-ass men who have nothing better to do with their day but to stand on the corner with a radar? I mean, at least the people standing on the corner with a camera are actually doing something to protect our freedoms.
I'm sure everybody's heard of Copblock and all that.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with Copblock, it's basically a sort of grassroots movement to try and encourage police accountability and raise public awareness about police abuse of power. I'll put a link to their website in the description so you can learn more about it.
For those of you that have not heard of what a sovereign citizen is, or you're not familiar with them,
notice how he just suddenly shifts topics like that? Like he briefly mentions Copblock, but then all of a sudden starts talking about sovereign citizens. If I didn't know any better, I'd think he was trying to imply that they're the same thing.
Sovereign citizens are basically people that live in the United States that claim that they do not recognize U.S. law.
It's not so much that they don't recognize U.S. law, it's more that they believe that there's some aspect of U.S. law, or some interpretation of it, that basically lets them get a free pass on certain responsibilities, such as obeying police officers or paying taxes or things like that, usually citing some obscure and antiquated source of law such as the Articles of Confederation. Now, while these people's arguments may be dubious from a legal standpoint, I definitely think there is a moral argument for rejecting the authority of the US government, or at least being skeptical of it.
I bet you'll recognize that fucking jail cell.
So this is what's known as argumentum ad baculum. It's basically when you appeal to some sort of threat of negative consequences to make your argument. The reason this is fallacious is because people would be inclined to accept your conclusion not on the grounds of sound logic or reasoning, but more to avoid the negative consequences.
And what's funny is I would love to see one of these guys try that kind of shit in North Korea.
Red herring!
Well, I guess it's just a-okay to be authoritarian over here, so long as there's other places in the world that are more authoritarian. I guess that's how morality works all of a sudden. It's okay to do something wrong as long as someone else is doing it worse than you are.
If you went to North Korea and you tried this, you have balls the size of Brazil.
Balls the size of Brazil. I like that. I'm going to start using that.
Unfortunately, here in the United States, it is perfectly legal to be a dumbass.
Well, sure. I mean, I don't recommend it, obviously, but you're not really hurting anybody by being a dumbass. Other than yourself, arguably.
Now, before I start my rant on these red-headed stepchildren of society, let me just throw it out there, I am one of the most laid-back cops you will ever meet. It takes a lot to piss me off.
Well, great, that's fantastic. Then you're not the target of criticism for organizations like Copblock. The type of cops that these organizations tend to criticize are the ones who are authoritarian, who are short-tempered, who are trigger-happy. It's not a blanket smear campaign against all cops, as people seem to think.
I'll stand there and joke with you and make you laugh, and I'll laugh, and then you get a warning, and we all have a good day. However, I do like a challenge, and I love eating cop blockers and sovereign citizens for breakfast.
So you're more concerned with antagonizing these people than critically evaluating their arguments.
I don't care how big of a dick you think you can be, I promise you I can be a bigger dick. I will give you a dick buffet. Okay, that one right there sounded really bad.
So when met with antagonism or hostility, your strategy is to reciprocate it, rather than try and calm the situation. You ever hear the expression, 2 wrongs don't make a right? You'd think that police officers, as public servants, and keepers of the peace or whatever, would want to hold themselves to the higher standard, be the better man in this situation.
I hate when I see new officers totally freeze up.
Really? This is a significant problem for new officers? Public sentiment toward police being what it is these days? You'd think that dealing with hostility and antagonism would be a basic part of the training.
Whenever they come across one of these like in-person keyboard warriors.
Ah, keyboard warrior. My favorite derogatory term, used as a blanket way to discredit anyone who holds an opinion I disagree with.
I, however, put both my hands together, I look at the clouds, and I thank whatever power might be above me for blessing me with today's dumbass.
Well, isn't it obvious? Anybody who shows skepticism toward police authority and doesn't just blindly go along with it must be a dumbass.
And what kills me is like the first words out of their mouth is always, I know my rights. Oh, do you? That is fantastic. How many amendments to the Constitution are there?
Well, I'd argue that rights are something that exists naturally. Every human being is naturally endowed with them. You don't need a constitution in order to have rights. Constitution may be helpful in terms of officially having them on record, but you don't need it in order to have rights.
And they always give you this like blank stare. Exactly, shut the fuck up.
You know, it's really funny to watch are those videos where a cop does actually encounter someone who knows their rights. And it's the cop who's standing there speechless with a blank stare.
An asshole while I'm doing this rant. I promise you I'm not one of those like power tripping cops, but I cannot stand these two groups of people. If you hate me simply for the fact that I wear a uniform, then fuck you.
Yeah, nobody hates you because you wear a uniform. I don't think the primary criticisms against the police are fashion related.
You don't know me, bro.
Well, you don't really know me either. Do you think it's unfair to paint all police officers with the same brush? Then why would it be any more fair to paint all police critics with the same brush?
A lot of cop blockers are actually really good people. They just don't really like authority, whatever.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different arguments that cop blockers make. From the non-aggression principle to police accountability. You can't necessarily boil it down to an idea as simple as authority bad.
I get it. Sovereign citizens, however, are much more dangerous.
Sovereign citizens aren't actually as dangerous as people think. Most of them are actually fairly benign. It's just that the ones that are dangerous, the ones that do crazy shit, are the ones that tend to be in the public spotlight. A guy simply driving around without a license or without plates on his car, without doing much else to hurt anybody, isn't really going to gather much attention from the media.
These guys are notorious for like shooting cops on traffic stops and shit like that.
Here's the thing about shooting cops. While I don't condone initiating violence against anybody, police officer or otherwise, there may very well be situations where shooting a cop is necessary. I'll put a link to an article by Larken in the description that discusses this further.
Like they will do whatever they have to do to get away from a cop.
Yeah, for the same reason people would do whatever they have to do to get away from a pack of rabid wolves.
It's pretty bad when the FBI classifies you as a domestic terrorist.
Fun fact, under the FBI's own definition, police would count as a terrorist organization. I'm not even shitting you, there's a link to an article in the description.
That means somewhere down the line, you fucked up.
Not really. I mean, people have been put on the FBI's watch list for things as simple as criticizing the government. Hell, for all I know, I'm on the FBI's watch list. Which means some lucky special agent somewhere gets to claim that they're tasked with keeping tabs on a possum.
And I love watching the video compilations of these guys getting owned in court.
Yes, because government-run courts are these prestigious institutions that are totally fair, unbiased, and judicious.
When you walk into a courtroom and you tell the judge that you do not recognize the U.S. law, you might be a dumbass. If you don't recognize the law of the land that you live in, go to Peru then. Go to Antarctica. Go fuck a polar bear.
What kind of polar bear are we talking about here exactly? Also, I'm surprised you didn't mention Somalia in that list there. That's like the go-to place that people mention when they make this argument.
It takes a special kind of stupid to hate all cops whatsoever.
It also takes a special kind of stupid to enforce all laws whatsoever. This is why certain police departments are actually implementing, and I shit you not, a maximum IQ. No, not minimum IQ, maximum IQ. Yes, you heard me correctly. In some parts of the country, you can be too smart to be a cop. Now, why would that be? Why wouldn't you want smart people being cops? Wouldn't the smart people be the ones who are better able to, piece together evidence, understand the law, make good decisions in stressful situations? Well, here's the reason for it. As a cop, your job at the end of the day is to enforce laws. Now, I know that Officer401 here might have a different idea in mind. He might see himself as someone who protects and serves the community or whatever, and that's great, but that's not the way the government who's paying him sees it. From the perspective of the government, all a police officer is an enforcer. Whatever a politician writes on paper, it's their job to actually go out and enforce it. Their job isn't to criticize the law or evaluate the law, just to enforce it. Now, if someone is intelligent, if someone has critical reasoning skills, what are the chances that they're going to look at a law that's absolutely absurd or that puts people in danger or that does nothing good at all and say, yeah, I'm going to enforce this. This is a good thing to do for the community. So while smarter cops might be what's good for us, it's not really what's good for government.
These are probably the same type of people that hate certain races based on stereotypes.
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
Think about it. How is it any different to hate all cops than it would be to hate like all Mexican people or all black people, whatever?
Well, first of all, you choose whether or not to be a cop. You can't necessarily choose your skin color or race. Second of all, cops are mercenaries of the state. Their whole purpose, the reason they exist, is to take whatever politicians write on paper, whatever the moral implications of it may be, and impose it on the people against their will using force and violence. Your entire job, the whole reason your profession exists, is to threaten people, to point guns at people. That's the difference.
Yes, there are cops that should not be cops.
Interesting how all the cops that should be cops never seem to do anything about these cops who shouldn't be cops. You'll hear this often from police apologists. Most cops are good. It's only a few bad apples that spoil the whole bunch. Well, if that's the case, that an overwhelming majority of cops are good, and it's just a fringe outlier of cops who are actually bad, you'd think these good cops would be on these bad cops like rust on a muffler. But whenever you watch these videos of police officers shooting somebody, beating the crap out of somebody, doing something that they shouldn't really be doing, more often than not, what do you see the other cops in the background doing? Standing there watching. Yeah, way to go, good cops.
I can agree with that. But there's also janitors that shouldn't be janitors. There's teachers that shouldn't be teaching. And there are singers that shouldn't be singing. People hate cops because we are a sign of authority.
You sure it's that, and not all the innocent people who've been shot, killed, had the crap beat out of them? I mean, there are plenty of other professions that are also a sign of authority that aren't nearly as hated.
And unfortunately today, people think it's cool to oppose authority.
People have always thought it was cool to oppose authority. Heck, our country was founded on opposing authority. Roughly 200 years ago, a group of 13 men gathered in Philadelphia and basically said, yeah, sorry England, you're not in charge of us anymore. Shortly after, the French followed suit. King Louis was being an asshole and bossing people around, and they weren't having it. They put him in the guillotine, chopped his head off. There's Rosa Parks, who refused to go along with the Jim Crow laws. There's Anne Frank, who refused to go along with the Nazis. When the Soviet Union tried starving the people of Berlin, Harry Truman was like, yeah, that's a nice wall you got there, but we're gonna fly some planes over it and feed your people anyway. See, history abounds with examples of people putting what's morally right before the dictates of some authority figure.
I would have had my ass beat if I ever would have talked back to a cop.
So you think people should be violently attacked for the horrible, heinous crime of criticizing somebody's authority? What, why? Because the person they're challenging has the right badge and uniform?
And heaven forbid if I would have resisted one.
You see, ordinarily, if you tried to bust into someone's home, demand orders, threaten someone with violence, kidnap somebody into a cage, you would be viewed as in the wrong, and if your victim shot you, that would be considered a legitimate act of self-defense. However, if one were to obtain the magic badge and uniform, one can transcend from us mere mortal homo sapiens, and gain special rights and privileges the rest of us don't have. Now, if that person were to perform any of the before-mentioned acts, busting into someone's home, busting into someone's car, kidnapping somebody, it's no longer seen as aggression, but law enforcement. And if your victim were to shoot you, it would no longer be considered legitimate self-defense, but illegitimate resisting, and your victim would be seen as in the wrong in this scenario. Because through the magic politician papers known as law, morality now applies differently to you than it does everybody else.
I don't care if you think you have been wronged. Go to court. That is what court is for.
Another common argument from police sympathizers, well, if you think a cop isn't treating you fairly, don't duke it out on the streets, go to court. That's what court is for. Well, there's two problems with that. The first problem is that it's kind of hard to sue people when you're dead, but for the sake of argument, let's assume that the cop doesn't beat you to death, but just short of it, and you go to court to try and sue the cop. And let's be really generous and pretend that stuff like qualified immunity and other special protections that cops get from liability, let's pretend those don't exist. The cop works for the government. The judge overseeing the case works for the government. Now, in any other context, this would be seen as a conflict of interest. An entity that's arbitrating a dispute should have no connection or affiliation with any of the parties involved in the dispute, for reasons that should be obvious. Now, if we had primarily private security, this would no longer be a problem, because in this case, the police would be an altogether separate entity from whomever is arbitrating the dispute. But under the way things currently work, the police and the people judging the police are on the same team. This is why it's virtually impossible to hold police officers responsible for their misconduct. So shit that would land you or me in prison, they get off on like an unpaid suspension.
Don't battle it out on the side of the road with a cop who's about to electrocute you because you won't stop.
Because you won't stop. Not because you're dangerous, not because you're posing a threat to anybody, not just because you're giving the cop a little bit of a hard time means that they get to put electricity into your body. Gee, I wonder why people hate cops.
Why have we lost self-accountability in today's society? I don't get it.
Well, I can't speak on behalf of everybody, but I know for certain people, they were handed a badge and told, here, the rules are different for you now.
If you fucked up, you go to jail. That's the way it works.
Or at least that's the way it should work. The problem is, oftentimes, you can not fuck up and still end up in jail. A good majority of people in United States prisons these days are in because of victimless drug offenses. That is, the horrible, heinous, awful thing they're guilty of doing is laying back on their porch and rolling a blunt. Gee, thanks, officer, for keeping me safe from that guy who was hurting absolutely nobody.
Nobody thinks anything they have done is wrong these days.
Well, if you want to go there, it seems like cops never take responsibility for what they do. They never apologize or say sorry, I wasn't thinking clearly, I overreacted, my condolences to the family. No, it's always an excuse. Oh, I feared for my life. I thought he was reaching for a gun. The kid I shot and killed was holding a video game controller which vaguely looked like a gun, so I decided it was the best thing to do.
And it's weird because these cop haters are always telling people that thank us for doing our job that they call them bootlickers and shit like that.
Also in the description, I'll be posting a link to a Copblock article which discusses in detail what a copsucker is and the criteria for being a copsucker. Not everyone who supports the police is a copsucker. Plenty of people support police officers who are good and actually do good things for the community while condemning the bad ones. The people who think that you're some kind of angel who can do no wrong and try to formulate every excuse they possibly can whenever a cop is busted doing something bad, those are copsuckers. Those are the primary targets of our criticism there.
I'm sorry your life is so screwed up to the point where you have to hate me.
I don't hate you though. I don't hate all cops. I'm critical of the institution as a whole, correct, but that's nowhere near the same thing as blindly hating all cops. For example, saying I hate Walmart is a lot different from saying I hate everybody who works for Walmart. You can criticize an organization or an institution without having it out personally for the people affiliated with that institution or organization.
But get your head out of your ass. When I go to work at night, I do not stand in front of the mirror while I'm getting ready and I'm like, whose day am I going to fuck up today? Whose kids am I going to have taken by defects? When I put on my uniform, I can't speak for anybody else. I cannot speak for anybody else. When I put my uniform on, my sole intention is to come help people.
Well, I have no doubt of that, Officer401. As a matter of fact, I'm sure most police officers join the force or do what they do with the best of intentions. That does not, however, mean that the institution of policing as a whole is immune from criticism.
That is my job. That is what I signed up for almost 10 years ago. I got into this because I wanted to help people. I've never had one complaint of racism. I've never had one complaint of excessive force. I come to work and I do my job, and I love the people that I'm around. I love my community. I really do.
Well, here's my advice to you then, if you happen to stumble upon this video. If you really are that passionate about helping people and serving your community, then I'd say quit the government and just work directly with the community. Suppose that Officer401 here decided to quit government police and join private security. Not only would he most likely be paid better and have access to better equipment, but he would actually be directly serving the community rather than just being a cog in the government's machine. I mean, if you're in an institution that's frequently criticized for being racist or using excessive force, well, wouldn't you want to distance yourself from that?
But if you hate me just because I wear a fucking uniform and you're gonna give me hell, I got something for you.
So I'm about to totally and completely just blow your mind. I'm about to drop a massive bomb of wisdom and knowledge onto you. Are you ready? Hold on to your hats. You can be both a cop and a cop blocker. Yeah, it's true. You can be a police officer and believe that other police officers should be held accountable for their misconduct. If you look at the Copblock website, they actually have a page called LEO's Welcome. It's not an anti-police movement. We know that there are good, honest police officers out there who want nothing more than to serve their community. And if you are one of these good cops who are sick of the bad cops tarnishing the reputation of your profession, by all means, we'd be happy to have you aboard the Copblock movement.
The moral of today's story, don't be a cop blocker, don't be a sovereign citizen, don't be a dumbass.
Don't be a copsucker either. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of police officers who work hard to serve and protect their community, and I think they deserve all the respect in the world. But when they fuck up, which they do rather frequently, they need to be held accountable just like the rest of us. Until next time, this has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.